Welcome to Inspirational Leadership. I'm your host, Kristen Harcourt, and we have another fabulous guest, and I'm very excited to introduce her to you. Glain Roberts-McCabe is the founder and president of the Roundtable, a company that helps leaders navigate change, disruption, and growth by building the mindsets and behaviors that matter most. A sought-after expert in the field of group coaching, Glain works with executive teams with high potential fast trackers to move from heroic leadership to making a bigger collective impact. With over 30 years of leadership, business, and coaching experience, Glain combines an evidence-based approach with pragmatism. Roundtable programs have received multiple awards, including a prestigious Gold Award from Brandon Hall for Best Advance in Leadership Development, the 1-4PL Award of Excellence for Designing Curricula, and the Roundtable has been named Best External Consulting Advisory in Canada by the Canadian HR Awards. Glain is also the author of 2 Amazon best-selling books, The Grassroots Leadership Revolution, and Did I Really Sign Up for This? Welcome to the show, Glain.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm excited for this conversation as well. I will share with the audience that I have known Glain for a while now. I want to say 2015, around then. We met through Steffi Black.
Yeah, I think it probably was before that. I think it was probably 2010 or something, because I thought I met you pretty early on in my journey with the Roundtable. So yeah.
That's right. You're right. Because we have also roots with Micah and the McQuaig Institute in our personal lives. So of course, I'm even more excited when I get to talk to a friend and someone who I deeply admire. So Glain, I would love everyone to get a chance to get to know you better. So let's just start off. Tell us more about your journey and what got you to this amazing work you're doing in the world.
Yeah, well, so I'll fast track it a little bit. So I had been in sales and marketing type roles, worked in not-for-profit, but I'd been a team leader since the age of 24. And when I was 30, I joined a company that you just mentioned, Micah, and had joined them as their head of client relations, also known as business development. And when I was there, it was the first time, even though I'd been leading teams at that point for 6 years and thinking I was doing a pretty good job, it was actually the first time I got to deep dive into my own leadership, because we did everything. We were sort of that soup to nuts kind of consultancy, assessment, coaching, development, training, all of that work. And, you know, when you work in a firm like that, you get to do all of the assessments, get the coaching. I got coach certified when I was there because I was interested in being, frankly, a better manager. So I thought, well, maybe I'll, learn how to do that by doing some certification in coaching. But what I was really interested in when I was there was the way we develop leaders. And I think the experience I had working for a firm that is very focused on leadership development is that you start to realize that even though we were selling one-day leadership workshops, that's not how you develop leaders. Leadership development is an ongoing journey. And I was very lucky because I was in, frankly, a swimming pool where I got access to things. I got a lot of feedback. There was this culture of, building our capability together. And I started to, get quite curious specifically about high potential leaders. I myself had been fast-tracked. I became a managing partner of the firm when I was in my very early 30s, and all my peers were in their mid to late 50s at the time. And I can remember feeling very lonely and isolated at that point. And my boss had been a member of YPO, Young Presidents Organization, for years. And I remember going to him one day and saying, "Where's my YPO? I want to be in a YPO group with other like-minded leaders and frankly talk about you and how you're driving me crazy." And he said, "Well, you can't join YPO. You have to be the president of the company." And at that time, going back to the year 2000, that was kind of what was out there. There was all these groups for CEOs, and in parallel, I got invited to be part of a mastermind group with some friends, and I just started really getting fascinated by this notion of peer groups. And I thought, if senior executives, if CEOs take the time to get together in peer groups, there's got to be huge value to that. And what would it look like for mid-level leaders to do that? What would it look like for directors or VPs and particularly ambitious type A personality, high potential folks to get into, programs like that? So I piloted something when I was at MICA. I then left. I went to another organization that had peer groups in place for very senior executive women. It was a women's organization. I was there for about 6 months, and I had to reconfigure those programs because they weren't working very well. And so I had an opportunity to kind of go in and work with, the most senior, women in Canada, and loved it. But what it sort of said to me was, oh my gosh, you guys are at the most senior level, like, as VPs and SVPs and EVPs and presidents, and you still have the same issues that people who are, mid-career, mid-level are struggling with. And so it was this sort of realization that we all like to think we're so different. We're really not that different. We struggle with so many of the same issues. And so when I left that organization after 6 months, it was to start my own, to start the Roundtable, at the time called the Executive Roundtable, but now we just go by the Roundtable, with this view of how do I, create a development program for leaders that isn't this sort of one and done event, but also is really designed exclusively for people with a lot of career ambition who, really are interested in moving their careers forward, but not at the sacrifice of themselves. And how can we be more in partnership with our employers? So that was sort of the impetus of what I wanted to create. I wanted to create this community of leaders and individuals who were given the tools that they needed when they needed them in order to be able to advance, the results, yes, for their team and for their company, but also for themselves personally, so that they could have happier lives, more balanced lives. I'd burnt out at least twice in my career. And I think, it's easy for high performers to put a lot of pressure on themselves and not know when to put the brakes on. So there was a lot of the things that I'd sort of learned from having this very rapid ascent myself that I wanted to start to, do development differently for that particular group of leaders. So that was the impetus of the Roundtable.
I love that for so many reasons. I think, first of all, being able to be part of a community and learn from one another to realize that you're not alone and you are having so many challenges that are the same. I was kind of smiling as you were talking about mid-level leaders having some of the same challenges as senior executives. I've had senior executives in a coaching session who sometimes almost feel embarrassed and say, I shouldn't even be sharing this. I shouldn't even be complaining. I shouldn't be working through this because who am I as a senior executive? Do other senior executives? And then I have to say to them, yes, I see the same challenges all day long, mid-level to senior executive across industries, male and female, not just female, because a lot of the ambitious and a variety of different things in terms of the challenges, because you are interacting with humans all day long. So the human challenges for all genders is something that's showing up as well. So I love that. And then being able to have a community where you can learn from one another. And then the other thing that you shared that I think is really important that sometimes got left out is back in the day, also being someone who's a type A, who is very driven and constantly looking for what's the next thing and the achievement and the goal orientation, but not necessarily having enough emphasis on the work-life integration. And one is not at the expense of others, as you said, with the burnout. Definitely something I saw pre-pandemic, continue to see even worse during the pandemic, and then afterwards as well. Because what I do see with some organizations is they see the high performers who already have big containers. So they're like, oh, you have a big container. We're just going to keep on giving more and more. And then we get to a point where they've crossed the line and still sometimes don't even ask for help until it's too late.
Totally. And I think, there's a couple of things you said there. I mean, we have an expression, right? If you want something done, give it to a busy person. And that is the challenge. A lot of high potential, high performing leaders they've got huge capacity and also, but what sits underneath that too, for a lot of people is whether they call it imposter syndrome or fear of failure, is this feeling that they can't say no. They don't want to let people down. They're worried about, because they're ambitious, they're worried about saying no, how that's going to affect their career path. So there's a lot of self-talk that I find really, can get, all of us have it, and it gets into our heads. And so you sort of see the same patterns over and over again. And the other thing you said, that when I started the business, I really saw my, obviously the business has evolved a lot since I started it, but I really wanted it to be for leaders that were, I called them mid-career leaders. So 30 to 45 years old. The original program that we designed was aimed at that group. And at that time, those were my peers. They were Gen X cohort. And the challenge for a lot of Gen X leaders had been that with so many baby boomers sitting in leadership roles, a lot of Gen X leaders had not had the opportunity to be promoted and to learn by doing, which is how you learn leadership. You've got it. You can read how to fire somebody. Until you go and fire somebody, you do not know what that feeling is like, right? Giving feedback, all of those things that we have to do as leaders. And so you would find people who'd gone from running a small team to suddenly now running a department as these opportunities started opening up. And I the number of people that would say to me, like, I've never had to give a performance for you, but I can't tell my HR person that I don't know what I'm doing. They pay me, hundreds of thousands of dollars to know how to do this stuff. And I have my MBA and I have all this. And so there was this almost like in some ways like a shame that was attached to this, but it was really because of just the lack of progressive opportunity for that cohort at that time. And so I think, over the years, now obviously we still have that same original program is still in play. I've gotten older. The members of those programs have gotten younger. And in some cases, we introduce other programs that are, for people at different stages of career. But those common threads still remain. I don't love, it's funny, I've been saying the word high potential. I don't love that word because I think it gets misused in organizations, and the way people define it is wrong. For me, it actually, if I were to really say it to people, it's really about different people have different levels of energy, they have different motivations, and what tends to get rewarded in organizations tends to be those people with high drives to win, high drives to excel, high drives to, make an impact and get the job done, productivity, right? And, depending on the kind of culture your organization skews towards, it's those people that know how to play that game very, very well. And then often they're labeled the one as high potential. But for me, they're like, with every strength, there's corresponding liabilities. And I think for a lot of the folks that we work with, they're phenomenal people. They're exceptional, but boy, are they hard on themselves. Boy, do they have a hard time, letting go of a goal because it feels like failure, and they are wired to want to win or to want to excel, or, whatever it might be. And so I think that's what I sort of think about is when it comes to development. I know you have folks on that listen to your podcast that are in learning and development. I think it's less about like, what's the title, what's the level, what's the function. It's like, what's the mindset? What's the sort of motivation of this pool of employees, and what's going to be kind of an approach that's going to be helpful to help them unleash their best, whatever it might be. So, yeah.
Yeah, I really like that philosophy, and thank you for bringing up the mindset piece around what's driving it, because like with everything, there can be some incredible strengths that have blind spots that come along with that. And my experience is a lot of times when we uncover and get underneath what some of those limiting beliefs are, they see patterns that have been around for a long time around if they don't achieve the goal, that they're not enough. If they do make a mistake, a lot of perfectionism happening. If I do make a mistake, then I'm somehow not enough, that I'm not worthy. There's a lot of that underneath, or needing to prove themselves because the achievement was going back to attachment styles and parenting and how they got attention. That's what it was. So they've just continued this pattern. What I love so much about coaching and leadership development is, of course, when we develop the human, it's developing who they are in all aspects of their life, how they're showing up at work, in their families, in their communities.
Yeah.
And sometimes they unhook from some narratives that weren't serving them, so that they can actually ask for help, so that they can actually push back and say, I'm actually at capacity right now. I'm not going to be able to do this. Let's talk about an approach, some solutions around making this work. Maybe some things deprioritized, which is beautifully empowered. And in a lot of situations, not all, but in some situations, the organization and the leader is actually quite fine with that, but they didn't know because they weren't. And then there are cases where they're not, because there's a systemic challenge around humans are not robots, and we have to be cognizant of workloads and capacity and what we're demanding from people in their day-to-day as well, which I do think we have another issue with that too.
Oh, big issue for sure. No question.
Yeah. So when we start to think about the work that you do at the Roundtable, because we've got a lot of leaders, and we've got HR listening, and they're thinking about in terms of the culture they're trying to create and supporting leaders. And of course, HR is also human and leaders themselves. And then we've got people leaders and executives, even CEOs in the top who are listening. And it's also, I think, helpful for them to hear like what when they're at the roundtable and what the peers are talking about, and then in coaching and things like that. What are some of the themes, the consistent themes that you are hearing in terms of, where leaders might be struggling, where they could be getting more support, where maybe the organization aren't necessarily seeing things as accurately around the story and what they think is getting in people's way, and maybe it's not necessarily what they think it is. I'm curious around what some of those themes are that you see.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think one of the biggest things that we've really noticed coming out of COVID and now at the other side of COVID is that there is no question that the world has gotten more complex, more uncertain. Like, 10 years ago, we were talking about VUCA, right? The volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous environment.
Yeah.
It's like VUCA on hyperspeed. And I think what I see with both the executive teams that we work with and with the people in the middle that we work with is a real lack of clarity on the right direction forward. It is becoming increasingly, the number of organizations that we talk to and we work with that are on mandates around simplification or trying to be focused, and where there is, really ambitious agendas because the economy has been very uncertain in a lot of sectors, and yet no real clear direction from the executive team on how we're going to get there. And so it's creating a lot of spin. It's creating a lot of, for hypos, to use that, vernacular. Hypos like to win. And the challenge for a lot of organizations, if they don't kind of have their acts together, and people on an individual level that are motivated that way aren't seeing themselves as being able to win, because you've got these big targets on me, but I don't really know how we're going to get there. And I don't think you know how we're going to get there. It becomes demotivating. And in fact, the challenge with that type A personality top performer is they know they have options, and they do have options, and they can go to other places fairly easily. They're pretty clear on their marketability a lot of the time, right? And I think some of like if I go down a level, the way we think about, leadership development, team development, culture development at the Roundtable is that we really have to move away from this notion of heroic leadership. Most of the way we have developed leaders has been on an individual level. Don't get me wrong, self-insight, it's the foundation. If you do not have self-insight as a leader, I don't know how you move forward, but you cannot stop there. Like like when you stop at, okay, well, we've got now all these strong performers and everybody knows what they're doing. The problem is the world is too complex. The demands that we're expecting of leaders is too high. You cannot do it on your own. So the challenge with this now is that we need to move beyond ego. We need to encourage vulnerability, and we need to get leaders leaning into each other and coming together to support each other, because that is the part of the systemic problem that's happening, that's creating these challenges in organizations, is that executive teams are still under the mindset and belief system that they have to have it all sorted out. So I've seen CEOs who think they have to have all the answers. People who think within executive teams, people not leaning on each other and tapping into each other's strengths and capabilities. And so then that cascades down and then into the organization where we now have lack of clarity. We're not, because you don't know. How could you possibly know? Who could have predicted a pandemic and then a war and then all this uncertainty that's been going on, the climate issues that we're seeing, that are not new. And then this, this increased addition in post-COVID of leaders needing a whole bunch of new skills to be able to manage hybrid. I just saw a headline. I didn't read the article, but I just saw a headline about, I think it was PwC, one of the big accounting firms in the UK, demanding now people more to come back in the office more. I mean, this whole thing of the transition back post-COVID into the workplace, to me, when you just step out of it, it's actually a management skills issue. This is a communication issue. This is a skills issue of managers, right? It requires a different approach in leadership. It requires different skills as leaders to be able to manage in hybrid. You have to up your communication. You have to be really clear on accountability. You have to be really good at giving feedback. If those are things that you struggle with, putting people back in the office and in proximity, yeah, maybe that makes it a bit easier because you can just, manage by walking around, or, you don't have to be as clear because the person can walk in your office and ask you questions more easily because you're there, or all those crutches that make it easier for you versus you having to shift your behavior, right? Yeah. I think so I've just seen like a lot of, there's the lack of clarity, where are we going? There's totally unnecessary disengagement because of mandates, where people have been pushed back into doing things as a result of, I'm going to be controversial here, I think it's lazy leadership. Mm-hmm. I started my business virtually and it was hard for me. I'd only ever led with people outside my office door, and I had to make some very significant adjustments. Yeah. So I think there's that we see happening a lot. And then I think with the next generation that's coming in, the younger generation, the Gen Z, we're getting a lot of requests to talk about how do you manage Gen Z, which is no different than how you manage millennials. Like we were having that conversation 10 years ago, Yeah. But I think what is a little bit different about Gen Z, their tolerance for what a lot of organizations are demanding is very low. Their interest in doing things like uprooting themselves to go and get critical experiences by moving across the country or to a different country or whatever. They don't want to leave their family. They want to be more close to their their home base. That's what gives them a feeling of security. And so a lot of systems, especially bigger companies that have very prescribed ways of building talent, getting people to have experience and moving people around, they're going to be challenged in that area with this generation. And the other thing about this generation is they're really anxious. Like I have a daughter who's in this generation. That's very fascinating to see the amount of validation, the amount of feedback they need, but it's actually positive feedback and encouragement more than constructive. So I think the way and leadership, the way they think about leadership is completely different. And I think we're going to see a lot of tensions in the coming years as organizations who have models and processes and 9 boxes and this and that are going to be trying to figure out how to slot the talent into this. And as a result, I think we're going to see smaller, more agile companies. We're going to see more startups. We're going to see people really scooping up some really great talent, because the bigger organizations are a little, in some cases, the risk is what makes you great is you've been able to scale and you've got the systems to be able to scale. The downside is, are your systems aligning with where the workforce is going?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I've definitely, all of the themes that you have brought up, I've been seeing as well, and being at conference where they're doing a lot of the research and the statistics to show that the story is pointing to that as well. It's interesting. the hybrid from multiple vantage points. One is that one size fits all is not one size fits all, and the market isn't the same as the market was. Like, the market has shifted. People saw another way of doing things in another version, and to just be like, well, too bad, we're going back to how it was before, and not asking questions and listening to your workforce to what they want. Agree with you as well in terms of the Gen Z. They're also wanting difference. Like, to them, hybrids, like, why wouldn't it be? Like, they want different things around that. They also are very interesting as a demographic. What their version look like in terms of the different stages are not necessarily the same as other generations. Some of them are deciding not to have kids. And so the whole thing where I need to do this to raise a family, and it's like, well, those aren't my motivations and drivers. It doesn't look the same. So I don't feel the same. So I think the constantly asking questions and listening, like asking questions actually listening to what people are saying and doing something with it. I agree, because I do think if you're not doing that, it is lazy leadership. To speak to the other thing you said too, I've also seen that theme specifically around with some of the downsizing I've seen in the last 18 months. The information that's being shared back is, oh, we're going to let go of 30% of the workforce. Oh, and by the way, the targets just got higher. Yeah. And then they're like, so help me understand, like, I'm here and I want to help you get here, but help me understand how we're going to make that happen when we've just lost resources and you're putting the targets. That's so demotivating. Like, you're not setting people up for success. And I think we need to, again, take a step back and really think about what we're communicating. And I am seeing some senior executive teams that are coming out and doing that. And it's very costly. It's very costly, and they are going to, and I have seen where the high performers who are, most high performers, they can have offers somewhere else very quickly and are not going to continue to stay in that kind of landscape.
And I think often, like, in our world where, people are like, oh, well, how much does it cost to invest in this leader? I always think, I'm a business owner. I have staff. I have, I always immediately think of, what's it going to cost me to replace this person? And let me tell you, it's not their salary. It's often 10 times their salary. So I think this notion of, we sort of have it wrong. Like, I'll hear people say, oh, people are our most important resource. And yet, they won't bat an eye to spend, millions of dollars on like a software system to improve productivity. And yet hiring a coach for $20,000 when you're paying the person $500,000 is like, oh, a big spend. How is that a big spend? So I think sometimes, we don't make short-term decisions and kind of don't make the right investments, and we don't put our money where our mouth is around the importance of investing in people. The other thing too, just to go back to Gen Z, because I had a really interesting conversation with my daughter. She really kind of educated me on this group a little bit, because I'm a Gen X, and Gen Xers, it's all about hustle, right? Like, we knew that the employment contract had been broken in the 80s. You weren't going to get your gold watch. You were going to have to hustle. So we got labeled as the bitter generation, but also the disloyal generation, because we were staying at jobs for maybe 2 to 3 years. But part of that was because we were resume building. We were making sure that we were getting the assurance that, okay, if you're going to get rid of me, I'm going to get some experience. And I know that as long as I'm being valuable to you, you'll keep me around. But if not, I've got to make sure that I'm covering my own butt. We didn't have our, pension programs. My mother's like, oh, I don't know how you survive without having a pension. I had a pension at my first job that I was at for 2 years, and I've never had one since. Those types of things that really changed the employment contract. But the thing about, I think, us was that we weren't bombarded with social media at the time. And I think when I look at the generation, my daughter's generation, they have been bombarded with social media. They're being told repeatedly that they are the useless generation. They're told repeatedly that their world is bleak. They're never going to own a house. They're never going to be able to afford this. The cost of living has gone up 40%. They feel defeated before they even start. And so what we have here, which is a really, I think, something where I think as employers, we're going to have to be really proactive about this and really sensitive to the psychology. When I said that this is an anxious generation, I think about, when I was trying to get a job, I called my potential boss every day for 2 weeks until he gave me a job. I just hustled and I did it until I got that job. And what I notice with younger folks is I'll offer to talk to them and I don't hear from them. They don't reach out. And my daughter said to me, she said, but mom, it's because we're told we're useless. Like already we have this insecurity that we're going to be letting somebody down. So we don't even want to put ourselves out there to get rejected. And a lot of that I put on this, this culture of social media where you've been from a young age. And I think, you and I are the people who are parenting through this. Like I was on the front end of parenting a child through smartphones, and if I could go back and do it all over again, my daughter would not have had a phone until she was at least 16. I think it has completely for not in a myriad of negative ways affected our kids' confidence, self-esteem, and put too much of an external locus of control. And so it kind of, in some ways, I almost feel like we probably need to have somebody out there needs to start doing training, sensitivity training to hiring Gen Zs, just like you have sensitivity training to hiring people from different cultures. I actually think this group is almost like a different culture. I think the way they view the world, I think the way they think about things, I think that the concerns that they have, are very different than Gen X. We graduated in a recession. We were the ones that went back to school and got MBAs because there were no jobs and were waitressing. But there was kind of a screw you, we're going to prove you wrong attitude to Gen X. Whereas this next generation, I really worry for them. And I just think as employers, we have to probably not expect what we how we would have done it, my daughter will say to me, like, I feel like I'm like my mother now. Well, back in my day, we used to do this and we used to do that, right? But the lack of confidence that they have, boy, it's worrying, and I feel, and I just feel for this group of that are entering the workforce.
Yeah, I do as well. I think that we can't even put ourselves in their shoes because we didn't grow up with a smartphone. It's all we ever knew. We have some research, but not enough research to actually show the impact it's having on their actual brain development.
Yeah,
and
100%.
I relate as a mom who held out until grade 8, who was trying to hold out till grade 9. And the only reason that I finally gave in grade 8 was because it was just her and her best friend, the only two in her class that didn't have it. And it started to impact her in terms of her social connections.
I know.
That's how
challenge we're in.
Right. There was no other way to communicate. So their form of communicating was through texting. And usually the texting's actually through the apps, and can't do that without that. So at one point I had to start to make the trade-off around it's now impacting her ability to socially connect with the people around her. Okay, we are back. The beauty of technology. So Glain, we were just talking about how we want to be able to support them. And it's interesting as the culture changes, even with things like technology. And it's also making me think of this one too. It's so interesting because I see in terms of technology, and I'm bringing this up, and I think it's important because we have workplaces with people with smartphones and they're constantly feeling connected to their smartphones. And I read a really great book by Michael Easter called The Scarcity Brain. And it talks all about how the people who designed these phones, they're behavioral psychologists sitting in rooms. And it's the same people who were designing slot machines in Las Vegas.
Of course.
Who are, of course, doing these phones, right? So they are designed and very, very well designed to be addictive in nature. And so what I actually see across the board, so for sure, like what you're saying in terms of Gen Z, they have a unique thing in terms of agree what they're experiencing. But I also want to highlight here as we're chatting, I'm seeing how this addictive nature of the phone is impacting all generations who are on it a lot.
Oh, 100%. I think about my first job was at a daily newspaper, and I was on the ad desk, and I used to have to draw the ads that went in the daily newspaper. That drawing was sent to the distribution department that would get in a car and go and drive it over to the advertiser for approval. The advertiser would approve it. It would get driven back. Then it would go into a paste up room with people with electroset tape, go to camera placement, like the process. So if you wanted an ad in a paper on a Monday, you need to put it in 2 weeks before the publication of that Monday paper. Now, if you went into the Ottawa Citizen and walked around, they do it directly. You know, it's email to the person approves it. It is in the paper within the next day. You probably put it in hours, you know? So the speed to which technology has accelerated everything is massive. And as a result, you know, I was sharing with you that I just had a 3-week vacation in Bali. I unplug when I go away. I really subscribe to the view that if I cannot leave my team for 3 weeks on vacation, I do not have a great team and I am not a great leader. That is my litmus test on myself. I need to check in with myself to say, if you do not feel confident that you can leave these people for 3 weeks to run your business, what is it that you need to do differently? Right. And so, and then when I'm away, I don't respond to email. Do I look at email? I'm going to be honest. Yes, I do. I look at it during the week and I look at it. I look to see what's in my inbox. I respond to nothing unless there's something in there that I need somebody to respond on my behalf. I do not do it. So while I was away for 3 weeks, I would take 5 minutes, scroll through, delete all those spam messages. So I have a fairly clean inbox when I come back in, but I am not working. I did not think about work. I took a couple of workbooks that I read on the plane on the way over, and that was it. And I came back full of ideas, fully engaged, fully recharged. And that week I went and I did a session. The week I was back, I did a session for a group and I was chatting with one of the guys that was on this leadership team. And he said, yeah, I'm taking 2 weeks off this fall for the first time, 2 weeks back to back. And I said, what do you mean for the first time? Like ever in your career? He goes, yeah, I've never taken 2 weeks off in my career. He said, I tested it once. I did 10 days last year. And, you know, I had to come in for a couple of meetings over the 10 days. I'm like, well, that's not taking 10 days off. That's taking 6 days and then having a meeting and then taking another 4 days or something, right? But I think we create that for ourselves. So if I had put an out of office on and said, I'm out of office, I'm not responding, and then I responded, what am I telling people? I'm telling people that my out of office is a lie. I'm always available. And now I have to be always available because I've now set that expectations with people, right? My team knows how to get a hold of me if it's an emergency.
Yeah.
I have those things in place. But I think there's something about, you know, the myth of the hustle culture, the myth of needing to be busy all the time, the myth that, you know, the more you work, the more productive you are. That's such a huge myth, you know. So I don't know. My wish for a lot of, you know, really driven people is that, you know, hey, dial it back by 20% and see if anybody else notices.
Yeah.
Because I bet you they won't.
and has such an impact. Like, I don't even think, while I know anyone, all you high performing type A ambitious people who are hearing this, I know this is going to feel so counterintuitive. But I'll even give you something here. You're actually going to be more productive in the long run, but that's not the goal here. This is not why I'm saying it. But you don't even realize how good and how important it is to have rest, to have the reset. And I don't even care about the work thing. Like, that's what you're designed as a human. Like, you're not supposed to be hustling all the time, right? So I just hope people listening right now, this can be your permission slip, because I have seen this a lot in the last couple of years where leaders are really finally recognizing why it's so important, and the difference between being off on vacation and really being off intentionally and doing in a very prescribed and intentional way, like you're doing, and quickly going in, that is fine. But they're still really, really unplugged. So it's not 1 foot in and 1 foot out. And I've seen too much of that. I'm on vacation, but it's 1 foot in and 1 foot out. They're still attending some meetings. They're still, so your mind, your brain, you can't be off. You can't be resting because it's still going in. So you're not having what you can truly get when you have a vacation. And if I could, you know, recommend anything to any leader listening to this conversation, is to really, really make an intentional commitment to doing that more often.
I agree. And I think, you know, a lot of times, like, our brains are so funny, right? They're wired to keep us safe. And so a lot of things, I always, there's that expression, it seemed impossible until it was done. And I think one of the things for me that felt impossible, for years I thought about it and I thought, no, we can't do it. We can't do it. And we can't do it. And it was to go to a 4-day work week. I thought there's no way I can go to a 4-day work week. I need to be responsive to my clients. I need to be available to my clients. We just can't do it. And then there's people braver than me that started making that move. And I started looking and I started doing more research. And then one day I thought to myself, Glain, like, what is it that you are so afraid of? Like that clients aren't going to want to work with you because you don't work on Mondays. And I just thought, well, then maybe they're not the kind of people I want to work with. And so we moved to a 4-day work week. It's been over 2 years now. And, obviously we had a plan for it. We're really clear about it. It's easy. We're not a huge company, right? So when there's a dozen of you, you can like make these things, you can test and trial and recalibrate fairly easily as a team. But I would say, it doesn't mean that I don't ever work Mondays. That's not it at all. It's the idea is that because we also operate on a results only work environment. I know, our good friend Jody Thompson, like we've always worked on a results only work environment here. So there is still the principle of a row, but now we do it between Tuesday and Friday so we can communicate to our clients. This is when we're available. Yeah. But from time to time, we have to work on a Monday. Yesterday, our programs team had our program strategy meeting on a Monday because we're too busy in the fall to try and do it during a Tuesday to Friday. Tuesday to Friday is prioritized for our clients. Everything is centered around our clients during those days. And so we worked on a Monday to do that thinking work. I will tell you though, I said to my husband last night, I said, I wish I'd had my Monday off today because now I've got Tuesday to Friday during the week. What all of us, if you talk to my team, what all of us I think would say is we can't believe just the space that has created for thinking, for ideating, for becoming more productive, to being more focused. We've got a lot of the team members have young families to be able to do the things that they need to do during their week. They still, if they have a kids soccer game at 3:00 on a Thursday, they go to their kids soccer game at 3:00 on a Thursday and they do what they need to do to, get the results, not about time, but results. So I think, there's a lot of things that we will put, barriers around that I think until you try and do it, you don't see the upside though, that's on the other side of it. You see all of the potential negatives, but not the upsides. And what's the worst? And I always go back to myself when I'm struggling, but what's the worst thing that can happen? Right?
Yeah, exactly. The worst thing could have been, we're trying this out. We're experimenting. We're exploring. We try it out. We realize for our organization, it doesn't work so well. Okay. Maybe it's a different version. Maybe the iteration's a half day on Monday, but you don't know until you start the first iteration. That's how you innovate.
And that's what we did. We did like a 3-month trial to see how it would go.
Yeah.
And does it require, but it's like, it's this different leadership situation, circling back on leadership, right? These require then, I needed to show up differently. I needed to put different working agreements within the team. Like, how are we going to handle communication if we're only 4 days? How are we going to be responsive to our clients? What are the ways? So we had to really think through all of that. We didn't just say, well, we're not going to work on Mondays anymore. So I think it's every time. Leadership is situational. And I think the challenge for leaders, for all of us as leaders, is that we get comfortable doing things the way we're doing them. We have results. We get success doing it that way. And then a situation changes and maybe you're lucky and your approach works in that situation. But if it doesn't work and you don't have other tools that you can draw on, you're going to be in trouble. And what I find for experienced leaders in particular is that the things that they've been told through their career that they need to work on, the thing that makes it hard to work on those things is that they're always the dark side of their strength. It's always the deep underbelly of their strength. And that's why it makes it difficult to change that behavior, because it's totally attached to what makes you great. Yeah. So you're constantly having to recalibrate yourself, think about the situation and think about the role you're being required to do, think about the situation your team's under, and then think about then how you need to show up. And I think part of, the work that we do at the Roundtable is to help leaders finesse that approach. These are skilled people. They don't need more, articles to read and case studies to look at. They need to think about how do I finesse myself and give myself more opportunities to be equipped in different leadership situations? And how do I look beyond my own ego to lean in and tap into the strengths of those around me so that collectively we can make a bigger impact? And I'm not just that. I often find when I talk, I'm sure you feel the same way when you talk to some of your clients, a visual that will often come up for me is Atlas. Like I talk to them and I feel like they're Atlas with the world on their shoulders,
Yes.
up the hill on their own. And I think it does not have to be this way. Doesn't.
Yes. And I think that's such a beautiful place to end, because I was going to say, I always like to give my guests an opportunity to leave a final thought, but I think that's so powerful what you just shared there and that visual. So let's end it and right in this beautiful place. Glain, where can people learn more about you and the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so our website is GoRoundtable.com. Our company is The Roundtable. The website is Go Roundtable, and you can always find me on LinkedIn. I don't know if there are any other Glains. You can check it out and see, but I think I might be one of the only ones on LinkedIn. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn too. Always love having leadership conversations.
Amazing. And I will share all of that in the show notes. Thank you so much for being here today, Glain.
Oh, it was great spending time with you and talking about leadership and diving into some areas I actually hadn't really thought about. I don't know, my rant about Gen Z, I guess it must really be on my mind.
It's all, this
My
is
daughter
it.
would be proud of me ranting on her behalf, I think.
I love it. And for everybody, wherever you are in the world, we're sending lots of love. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. If you enjoyed this episode, please share with others so that more people can get exposure to the podcast. I think these are really important discussions. And if you're interested in talking to me and learning more about what I do in terms of one-on-one coaching, transformational keynotes, and leadership development training, would love to have a conversation. Please connect with me via email, on my website, or on all the socials. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Bye-bye.